do you take the Bible literally? I ask this question of churches all the time, and I catch them every single time. Oh, yeah, they all raise their hand. I said, so you mean Jesus is a stick? You guys are all sticks. I'm the vine, you're the branches. No, what happened? What went wrong here? This is a little after I tutored them a little bit in the game plan. If I asked you to take the Bible literally, you should have said what? And then some of them get it. What do you mean by that? Okay? And so this is what we need to be careful of, because we can get caught in a trap if we're not clear. Do you believe in evolution? No, we don't believe in evolution. Right? You don't think things change over time? Huh? Well, there are different ideas of. So you need the question, what do you mean by that?
I think a helpful way to frame maybe the Bible and the Christian life for our kids is to, and kind of our duties and our, how we're to live this life is in terms of two commissions. There's the cultural commission, right? Be fruitful and multiply, subdue the earth and rule over it. That is a command that all Christians have. That's something we want to pass on to our kids. And then you have the Great Commission. So the Cultural Commission and the Great Commission, two commissions that really frame our lives and help us to frame life for our kids. And because Erin and I are inadequate to equip you to do that, we brought a special guest on today.
That's very sweet, Brad.
Yeah.
Thank you. I know you don't mean a word of it, but I will play along for the sake of the podcast here.
Yes, we have a
showing
special
deference
guest.
to your elders.
We have a friend who can handle Erin's sarcasm. We have a special guest. He's special in a lot of ways, actually. Greg Koukl, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, well, this is really special for me. We've got a long history together, and some people say that means like we met each other like 15 years ago and we see each other at events like ETS or whatever. We have a long, intimate history together because we worked together at Stand to Reason for so many years, and it's just so sweet to be with you and Erin on the show here. It's really great. Warms my heart.
Well, Greg was before actually I ever joined Stand to Reason, Greg was a mentor kind of from afar for us. When Erin and I were doing youth ministry, we would use the resources of Stand to Reason regularly because we were doing apologetics and worldview training with our junior hires. In fact, before I ever met Greg, I remember taking one of our junior hires to a debate that Greg was doing in Orange County, California, you were debating Marv Meyer, this guy from the
Chapman
Jesus
University.
Seminar.
Right.
Chapman University.
I did not know you were there.
Yeah, and the debate was, is truth true?
Right.
And so I brought a seventh grader with me. We're giving him apologetic training. I'm like, you got to go watch Greg. And we watched Greg as graciously as possible wipe the floor with Dr. Marv Meyer's arguments. They were, it was great because I remember that junior hire was so encouraged, that Christianity can stand up.
Well, I had a great advantage in that because the title was, as you mentioned, is truth true? I mean, that gives me a leg up, doesn't it? And
the easiest debate question you can ever get.
Exactly. In fact, in that situation, I was a little bit nervous because I was still working on my MA in philosophy. Marv Meyer had a PhD, and very well liked. It was on his campus. It was at the Student Union, as you know, and it was packed out, wall to wall, standing room only. And he's a member of the Jesus Seminar, and he was, he's an expert in the Gnostic Gospels. I had my translation of Thomas, the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, was Marv Meyer's translation. It was in my library. Oh my goodness. So, and I don't want to get, blindsided by this guy. So I called JP Moreland. I said, I'm a little nervous about this, but it seems like an easy one. Is truth true? Really? Is that true? There is no truth. Is that true? People think that's a word game, but it's not. It's just obviously self-refuting. And I said, what am I missing? He said, JP said, you're not missing anything. It is that easy. So that was my strategy throughout, to show the self-refuting nature of the claim that there is no truth.
And this is why we have Greg on today, because Greg has been in the public, engaging with unbelievers. Greg is the founder and president of Stand to Reason, a great organization. I spent 14 years there as the student impact director.
14 long years.
Very long years. No, 14 really rich years, very formative for me, for my ministry. And Greg is also the author of numerous books that, well, I guess not, numerous might not be the right word, a few books.
Well,
Oh my
I mean,
gosh.
for that, I think, that people have found helpful, like, contributed to others and all that, but that,
Yeah.
therefore that I think have been a contribution. Let's put it that
Oh,
way.
absolutely. In fact, those who have listened to this podcast know that we regularly recommend Greg's books.
All the time. Actually, yeah. If you've listened to a handful of our podcasts, at one point you've heard us recommend either Greg's book, Story of Reality, which I told you, Greg, is my favorite book that you wrote.
And which we used with our homeschool co-op. We used that book one year to take them through the basics of the Christian faith. And
Yeah, and I tell people that all the time, that those are junior high students.
Yeah,
Obviously,
junior high, high
you
school.
wrote it for adults, but
Well, I figure if I can reach junior highs, I can get most adults in the package, right?
yes, actually, junior hires might pick it up even more quickly than some adults. But the junior hires had no problem with the book, and junior high and high school students that we took through it, I've read to my kids out loud. And anyways, it's a wonderful resource of the church, which is why we recommend it all the time. And then, of course, Tactics too.
And Tactics is one that we use in some of our training with students that we take on our immersive experiences. So we recommend those books. Greg's got a new book that we want to talk about, but before we get into the book, we just want to hear a little bit about your story, Greg.
Right.
Your background growing up. Did you grow up in a Christian home? How did you come to faith? What's been formative for you to get you where you're at today?
Yeah, I didn't grow up in a Christian home. I grew up in the 50s and 60s. I was born in 1950, and that was a way different world than it is now. And I'm actually really thankful to have grown up in that world and have the kind of freedom and latitude that young kids had to do whatever and not, wear a spacesuit so they didn't get a bruise, kind of thing. But it was great. And I had two brothers, and we were close in age, 4 years between the three of us. And I had two sisters, one on each end, and they didn't matter back then, but but it was great. And we were raised Roman Catholic. Okay, so to us, and I'm not saying all Roman Catholics are like this, but to us it was just perfunctory religious performance. You got to do the right things and whatever. There was one thing that I noticed, though, about Catholicism, and I think is still true today, is there was a sense of sinfulness, obviously, that was conveyed, but not I would say, a robust sense of God's grace, because there was no assurance of salvation. All right. And now I look back and I think this is unusual, because the gospel is good news. And when you die, you're looking at two doors, and one leads to eternal bliss and the other one leads to everlasting punishment. And you don't know which one you're going to go through. How could that be construed as good news? I mean, it's just something to think about. But anyway, this is the way I was raised. And then when in the mid 60s, when I was in high school, I just got out. Maybe I was 17 or 18 years old, and my girlfriend's sister challenged me, and she said, as I was talking about Catholicism, just making the standard kind of defense for that view that I'd learned in catechism and whatever, she said, "Do you really believe that?" Nobody had ever asked me that question before, and so I paused for a moment. I said, "No," and that was the end of that. And of course, mid-60s, 67, 68, anti-war movement, the Beatles, transcendental meditation, free love, all of these things were flooding into an otherwise stable culture, what had been for 15 years largely stable. And we had the death of John Kennedy. I was 13 when that happened. I remember that Cuban Missile Crisis. It's all vivid in my memory. But you had disruption beginning to happen in the culture, but it just took off in the 60s, and that was a really exciting time. And so I embraced all of that for a number of years. And I traveled around. I hitchhiked 35,000 miles around the country, in between going to school in different places, Northern Illinois University and Michigan State University, then to UCLA when I moved on the West Coast. So I just was embracing all of that craziness. And I wasn't really an atheist. I was a moral relativist, because that was very convenient when you're in an age when the hormones are flowing and, you don't want to think about God and purity and virtue. I mean, that kind of messes up the party. So, but I was against the war in Vietnam. And the reason was because it was an immoral war. Now, there was a time, and Brett's smiling here because he sees and you both do this, see the contradiction immediately. And but I saw it too then, and I reflected on it, and I thought, oh, whatever. Like a lot of people do now, I can live with the contradiction because of what I get in return. I can campaign for the things that I like and call them immoral, and I can live however I want and call it okay.
The selective relativist.
Say again?
The selective relativist.
Yes, exactly. And we see this like in spades nowadays. So this was something that really, it gives one a tremendous sense of freedom initially. And we've seen videos, YouTubes of people who have deconstructed, left Christianity, and they make the same thing. I never experienced such freedom. Of course, but it's an empty freedom in the long run, because you realize it's free because there's nothing left. Especially with the deconstruction crowd, they say, choose whatever you want. You can deconstruct Christianity and deconvert and then go wherever. In other words, they totally relativize it, and the center of the universe is you. It's completely narcissistic, all right? Now, maybe they're really nice people, and they love people, and they have a lot of politically correct views that seem to be loving and accepting, but nevertheless, their feet are firmly planted in midair, right? And so this is something that I realized, and by the way, a lot of people are realizing this now. A lot of the atheist crowd is shifting, and Justin Brierley has just written a book about that, the Undeniable Host. And I interviewed him last week. It was great. And he's just looking at the big shift that's taking place with atheists, even people like Peter Boghossian or Jordan Peterson. These are major players in this kind of look back and say, secular culture gives us nothing. And it's what Christianity has given us everything that we value, even though we're not Christians, and we're even atheists. So Tom Holland calls himself an atheist Christian or something like that, because he realizes all of his values are based on Christianity, even though he's an atheist. So this is what happened to me back in the early 70s. Not sophisticated like those guys as in their thinking, but I realized when my girlfriend of 5 years, my high school sweetheart, who had moved to California, and I followed her out because we were going to be together and continue our life together, such as it was, decided that she wanted to move on from the relationship. But that was devastating for me. It isn't what brought me to the Lord, but it was what caused me to reflect on my own worldview and realized ultimately I was alone in the universe, which was true given my worldview. I called it cosmic alienation, that I had a word for it, a phrase for it, but it's actually appropriate. In that big scheme of things, there's no one who really cares. You're by yourself. So that's kind of an existential realization of sorts. And then you got to decide, what are you going to do with your nihilistic nothingness understanding of the nature of reality? Well, the existentialist said, whatever you want. You have to make your own meaning. But for a lot of those guys, they just committed suicide because that's the emptiness. Now, in my case, though, my brother had become a Christian. My brother Mark was 2 years my junior. He had become a Christian a few years before in the Jesus movement, and because this was really taking off then. So the movie Jesus Revolution, people asked me if I saw it, and I lived it, as it turned out, in Southern California, especially Calvary Chapel. Yeah. First church that I actually crossed the threshold of when I was a brand new Christian 2 weeks later. But what Mark had done is he began to share with me about Christianity, and I just brushed him off. You need that. I don't need that. I'm too smart for that, basically, is my attitude. I was the only one to really go to college and of the 5 siblings, and I just thought I was too smart to be a Christian. So, and I had pushbacks, which are standard pushbacks, that he really wasn't able to answer. My own testimony is unique among our colleagues in that apologetics played no role, really, in becoming a Christian. And all I could say is that over a period of time, I got worn down by Mark. He kept telling me this stuff and the message of grace that I never heard in a robust sense. Robust grace. You can know you're going to heaven not because of what you've done and how good you are, but because of what Jesus has done for you. And I thought, that's different, right? And so in September of 1973, September 28th, so I just actually had my spiritual birthday about a month or so ago. And that was half a century ago now. So I'm half a century in the Lord. And Mark came to my apartment in West LA, and he said, he started telling me more about Jesus. And I said, Mark, you don't have to tell me any more about Jesus. I've already decided I want to become a Christian. It took me about 5 minutes to peel them off the ceiling, and I prayed this prayer, and I started walking, following Jesus, and I've been following for 50 years, and I've never strayed from my commitment to Christ. But I have to say, this isn't principally because of the strength of my own commitment. It's because there were so many people that were really good and solid that were around me that if I ever fell one direction or another, somebody was there to catch me and put me back up, or put their boot in my bottom, or whatever was necessary. And that's been a huge factor in my life. And this is why, and you know this, you both know this, that why I really have a deep commitment to discipleship and mentoring and working in a very intentional way in the lives of those people that are close to me. And actually even people that I'm just spend a little time with, if I can invest myself in them a little bit. And this is why Stand to Reason, the first words of our mission are, we train Christians. So we're not really, it goes beyond that, but we're not an evangelistic organization like other organizations. Our goal isn't evangelism. Our goal is to build ambassadors for Christ, and then they go from there. So that's my heartbeat, and it's been all these years, and it's been this is one of the pleasures of working with you all those years, Brett, because you're a great, teachable brother in Christ, from whom I learned a lot as well, and especially the emphasis on the next generation, and it's really through your influence in my life that now I have this aphorism: the most important generation is always the next generation. We got to pass that baton. That's what was done to me 50 years ago, and what I've tried to do ever since then. But your role in Stand to Reason really gave me a much broader strategic vision for the organization, not just for me individually. So anyway, there's my little thumbnail sketch of at least my background and how I kind of came to know the Lord and started moving in Christian things half a century ago.
I love hearing your story. Again, Greg, I've heard it before, but what struck me this time, actually, I knew your brother is the one who shared Christ with you, but maybe it's just, conversations we've had recently about family, but it actually is incredible that it was your brother, because oftentimes, as we know, our family can be the most difficult people to have spiritual conversations with.
Right.
So as you're talking, it struck me that that took incredible courage for your brother to keep talking to you. I'm assuming you had a close relationship, but still, sometimes it's like the closer you are, when you have a radical change like your brother had, and I don't know, just the family dynamics is difficult. And it's amazing that he just kept on sharing with you. Yeah, he did.
Now, keep in mind, my poor mom had 5 kids inside of 7 years. So this is a very tight shot pattern, right? Like 4 on the floor, right? Kind of thing. And so there was a closeness between the brothers that really actually intensified as we got older. Because when you're younger, 2 years is a pretty big difference with brothers, okay? Yeah. Ditch him kind of idea. I don't know, maybe they don't say that anymore, but it's like...
No, that's good for the young parents listening. This is good. Like, all my kids, they fight all the time. It's like, no, there is hope. But
as we got older, that came together. But for the record, and I hope this is encouraging to your listeners, is that Mark was the catalyst for all 5 of the kids becoming Christians.
Wow.
All 5 of the kids came to Christ through Mark. And Mark, who was full-time pastor for 35 years. My brother Dave's in prison ministry now, 50 years in the Lord, and a huge student of Stand to Reason. And my sister Sue, been a Christian even longer than I have, very committed to Christian. My younger sister Bonnie, coming along a little slower, but still deeply committed to Christ. She actually read The Story of Reality, and she wrote me a letter and said, this really put it all together for me in a very clear way. So she loved Jesus and committed herself to her, but she just had no real clear understanding about how the story fit together. And so that was really helpful. So it was very sweet to hear that. But it was all that way. And sometimes you have family members, and the kind of the flow of the gospel is lateral among those family members, like siblings in our case. Sometimes it's outsiders. So in my dad, he was a tough cookie, and he was a very strong personality, and he was a labor union leader in Chicago. Okay, let's just enough said, right? Okay, but he became a Christian when he was 70 years old, and he died when he was 71. But his transformation was so radical that when he talked about Jesus, he would start to weep. It was so amazing. So, but that came from his older sister, not from any of us.
Not
He
from
was
the kids.
contemptuous of us when we became a Christian. When we became Christians, he was contemptuous of us. So you just never know. And after a season, we stopped engaging him for Christ. We would pray for him and seek to honor him too as our father, even though at a distance, we would be honorable to him. But at the same time, we just, okay, we've said our piece, we just let it ride. There's no more opportunity here. So anyway, that's just to say you never know how God's going to work. And if you have wayward children and you raise them in the Lord, and they walk away, you don't know how God's going to work. I had no Christian upbringing. I became a Christian through my brother, but the Lord brought me without that kind of foundation, okay? And so you can be Christian parents and then have kids that leave, and then 5 years later at university or at work or some strange set of circumstances, probably because of your persistent prayer, God causes something to happen. There's a connection. And just what we do, Brett, and well, all of us, Brett and Erin, the people we talk to, and there's all kinds of stories of radical transformation. Rosaria Butterfield, for example, out of nowhere, Holly Ordway, these crazy stories where these people are so set against the gospel in every way imaginable, and God does a transformation. So this is what we can trust in.
And this is why we always have our interview guests share a little bit of their background, share their testimony. I think it actually, sharing the testimony is probably most productive in the context of other believers to encourage other believers. And we want parents and just all Christians out there who are listening to be encouraged by these details of Greg's story. It helps you to remember that God is sovereign and he's working even when you can't see it, even when present circumstances are very discouraging.
Right, exactly.
And now a lot of times we talk about testimony in the context of evangelism, which I think we're on the same page on this, Greg, that you don't see this in Scripture. This isn't, you'll read the book of Acts, it's not like the disciples are running around and their main evangelistic tool is sharing their testimony.
Yeah, you see it a little bit with the Apostle Paul a couple of times, but you're right, it's not the main tool.
Yeah.
It has a place, and it actually didn't serve him well when he did that. He just got him in more trouble, but there's a liability to it.
Yeah, and so, what I said at the beginning of this podcast, in fact, I'll add to what I said. I think a very simple way to frame kind of the Christian life for our kids is we've got 2 commands and 2 commissions, right? 2 commands: love God, love your neighbor, and the way that plays out is with the 2 commissions, right? Subdue the earth and rule over it, meaning build culture, create good things,
Salt and light.
Yeah, and then also to share the gospel. And now, in the context of the next generation, what we want to talk a little bit about is, of course, the great resource you have here in your new book. But thinking of it from kind of 2 angles. Number one, in one sense, our kids need to be evangelized. The kids that are growing up in our home, our highest aspiration should have to do with their salvation, their faith in Christ. But our kids are growing up in a very secular culture, culture that is hostile now, very aggressively hostile to the Christian faith. And if they're in the world at all, whether it's at school, even a Christian school, if they're on social media, they're getting exposure to this, and they're going to have questions. And so your new book, Street Smarts, I think is going to be a great tool for parents to answer your kids' own questions. Right. But then, secondly, when our kids do put their faith in Christ, is then to equip them to be ambassadors.
Yeah,
to go and make disciples. This is the primary mission of the New Testament church. Yeah. To go and make disciples, Matthew 28, and your book will also equip them with that. So give us give us the 30,000 foot view. Give us the big picture of what you're trying to do in this book.
Okay. Let me just back up on something you said there, Brett, because it's really important. I just want to emphasize that the goal of New Testament Christians is not to evangelize the world. It's to make disciples. And evangelism is the first step. So we can win our kids to Christ. We still have a discipleship role in their life. It's one to lead to the other. Great Commission is not evangelism. The Great Commission is discipleship. And you said that, and I'm just underscoring it. So
You're just emphasizing the important points I made. Thank you. I appreciate that.
well, I always keep in mind where you learned them. So
That's right. Boom.
Touche.
But what I've tried to do in my writings, the story of reality is meant to create a foundational understanding. It's to put all the little pieces together in a coherent story, not a complicated story, but a story that entails the 5 main points of the storyline, the plot line, and the order they took place: God, man, Jesus, cross, resurrection. So we got the beginning and the end and the important thing, the theologically important things that happen in between. Okay. So you get this foundation. That's what we are to defend. And you know this. There's a lot of people who are Christians who love Jesus, but they don't understand the story. And so it's hard for them to defend it, and they get caught up short when they're challenged with why Jesus is the only way and what about the problem of evil in the world. And they don't understand that the problem of evil is not a problem for us the way it is that most people think. It's a problem for atheists. And that's why in the new book, when I deal with the problem of evil, the title of that chapter is Evil, Atheism's Fatal Flaw, okay? And also, Jesus is the only way. How do they make sense of that? And the issue is that sometimes singular problems, problem of evil, have singular solutions. All right, Jesus being the only way. When you understand the story, you see how those fit together. It becomes easier then to defend the truth. So with that proper foundation, the question is, and you used the word ambassador before, Brett, because it's a very important project with Stand to Reason. We have an incarnational approach. We want to build a certain type of person. We don't want to just produce information, which is fabulous, and I'm glad a lot of people do that. But we are trying to incarnate a concept and have an ambassador who has knowledge and wisdom and character that he brings to the table when he engages other people, okay? And in that knowledge area and the wisdom area in particular, how do you maneuver in conversations? And so this is where an artful method, wisdom and artful method, comes in the tactics book, which was the first piece that I really worked on the process of engagement and discussion, and the 3 steps of the tactics material is a simple game plan. And it's very simple because it's easy to remember, and it's simple because it's easy to execute, and it's simple because it keeps the Christians safe. Because the center of the game plan is, of course, using questions in different ways. And so the first step is we're going to use questions to understand a person's view. The second step, we're going to use questions to understand not just what his view is, but now why he thinks that's credible, it's true. And simple questions like, what do you mean by that, for the first step, or some variation. Simple questions like, okay, now I understand you, but how did you come to that conclusion? Or what are the reasons you think that's the way things actually worked out, or they are, or whatever. Very simple and very safe for Christians, because a Christian is not advancing his view at all there. He's just gathering information. But you guys know just those first 2 steps where you're being inquisitive and it's safe because you're asking questions, you can make a lot of progress with people because it forces them to think through their own view more carefully, which they almost universally have not done. And
let me jump in here and say this is what you should be doing with your kids as well, asking them these questions, because we want to teach our kids what we believe and why we believe it. And so these questions will help any parent assess, hey, okay, where are your kids at in their knowledge of the Christian faith? So these are questions that we engage the unbelieving world. You can also engage your kids with these, and you need to. And this is why we always are recommending tactics, because it's great training for parents.
Yeah. I want to add a qualifier there with kids. I think when you have children using this, you have to be a little bit more careful. It's easier with adults because there's more ego strength. Characteristically, with kids, the kids, when you ask them, okay, so what does that mean? You just said that Jesus is the Savior. Okay. I mean, they're going to repeat a lot of the religious lingo. Explain that to me a little bit. What we don't want them to feel like that they're being headed off at the pass. Okay, I'm asking you so I can shame you because you didn't get it just right, kind of thing, or your reasons for it. Just let them talk. I mean, this is my take on it. Just let them talk, and explain these things. And when I talk to younger people at some of our conferences. This is kind of what I'm trying to do, is get them to think. But the key part of those questions is, there's two aspects of those questions. One is so that we have a clearer understanding of their view, the reason, what it is and the reasons for it. The second one is that they have a clearer understanding of their view. This is a huge. Like, for example, when somebody says, well, do you take the Bible literally? I ask this question of churches all the time, and I catch them every single time. Oh, yeah, they all raise their hand. I said, so you mean Jesus is a stick? You guys are all sticks. I'm the vine, you're the branches. No, what happened? What went wrong here? This is a little after I tutored them a little bit in the game plan. If I asked you to take the Bible literally, you should have said what? And then some of them get it. What do you mean by that? Okay? And so this is what we need to be careful of, because we can get caught in a trap if we're not clear. Do you believe in evolution? No, we don't believe in evolution. Right? You don't think things change over time? Huh? Well, there are different ideas of. So you need the question, what do you mean by that? And this, when we ask that of others, and we also, when we're challenged, we ask that of others, of the challenge, like I just illustrated, or of their general view, it forces them to think more carefully about their own view. It turns out that when people ask, do you take the Bible literally? They're not asking a hermeneutical question. They're asking whether you believe those things that are ridiculous in the Bible. That's what they mean, And so but this is part of the conversation. You want to understand what exactly are they getting at, okay? Now, those are foundational. Those help us to move forward. The third step, and this is where the Street Smarts book expands on the third step that's in the tactics book, all right? So there's an overlap. The third step is using questions to make a point. So at some point, we want to advance our own view, whatever it happens to be, our point of view, or maybe we see a weakness or a flaw in somebody else's view, and so we want to help them to see that, We had an example earlier of a self-refuting view, Marv Meyer, there is no truth. Really? Is that true? Notice that that's a question. And it puts the ball back in their court, which is a nice benefit of questions. It's a virtue of questions because it takes the pressure off of us, tosses the ball back in their court. And in that case, it's meant to show that their view is self-refuting. We call that the suicide tactic, for example. It commits hara-kiri. It beats up itself. We don't have to do anything but point out the self-refuting nature of it. But notice there I'm using a question now to make the point that their challenge against me is not going to work. Maybe some others would, but that one won't work. Okay? So, and then when they see that, nobody's ever pointed that out to them before. Like a guy told me once, he said, why are you Christians so judgmental? And I said, well, what's wrong with that? Now, I'm setting him up, obviously, because I want more information. That's a, what do you mean by that question? Mm-hmm. Well, it's wrong to judge. And I said, well, then why are you judging me right now? Mm-hmm. And this guy had never heard anything like that before. Notice it's a question because he was doing the same thing that he thinks is wrong. Now, I think there's a qualification in the Christian understanding of judgment. I'm not going to get into that, right? Some judgments are right. Sometimes they're not appropriate. But people reflexively respond because this is what they say about Christians, always so judgmental. I said, everybody makes judgments, right? So I'm challenging him. And he didn't know how to respond to that. Mm-hmm. When I tell that to people, and I give that whole anecdote, which is I think it's in the tactics book, Christians, I can see their eyes, they're just, OMG, I never saw that before. But once they see it, they begin to see it everywhere, okay? And so this is what I mean by this third step, where you're using questions to exploit or expose a weakness or a flaw, either in a challenge that someone makes to you or maybe in their own worldview. And so in the Street Smarts book, the concept of Street Smarts, I use that phrase because, of course, this is an extension of tactics. It's got the tactical game plan. It's a standalone book, but if you've read tactics, you really got a lot more, a leg up on the material. And I have a whole chapter about gardening as opposed to harvesting. I don't want people to worry about harvesting. Although we've been given harvesting tools, you don't need harvesting tools. I know this is radical for people. Most people harvest themselves. And this is also in the New Testament. Now, of course, you and I know that means the Holy Spirit's harvesting them, right? But they're not there's no altar calls in the New Testament. There's no, people aren't invited to pray to receive Jesus as Lord and Savior. This is a fairly recent motif, say 150 years old. That's it.
Yeah, and I want to jump in here because I think sometimes, Christians feel this pressure, and you maybe even will hear somebody, a Christian leader, ask, well, how many people have you led to Christ?
Yes, right.
And then you just are washed over with guilt because, you think, oh, well, gosh, I don't know when the last time I led someone in a prayer or I had the altar call, the personal altar call.
Right.
And so I definitely wanted you to hit on and say more about this harvesting versus gardening, because I think this is...
And I think especially, Greg, as you answer that too, because that was this idea is that you put forward in the book. It's the second chapter of the book, is so important, I think, for us as Christians to get our minds around what we're actually responsible for, what our role actually is. Yeah. And then, of course, I'm thinking about it through the parent lens too, because as parents, are we required to be harvesters of our kids' faith? Or is our task to be gardeners where we can?
Yes.
And like with your story, maybe the harvester is going to be their sibling. Maybe their harvester is going to be a professor at college or a boss or a coworker later on. We might not get to play the role of harvester. Are we okay with that? Or are we getting pressure even in the church that this is supposed to be our role? So explain for people what you mean, the difference between a harvester and a gardener.
This is a very important distinction that you actually see with clarity in John chapter 4, woman at the well. She's gone in this part of the chapter, and the disciples come, and Jesus says, you are about to reap where you did not sow. Okay? Now, in that statement, it's kind of interesting because there are a couple of things kind of that you can infer properly from that. First of all, there's one field, in that case, Sychar. But, what he says is, you say there are 4 months and then comes a harvest. I say to you, look in the field, they are ripe with harvest. And I don't think he was saying every field is, but that Sychar was. And you are about now to reap where you did not sow. So you got one field and you got one team. You've got the disciples of Jesus in any era, okay? You also have 2 different seasons. You have a sowing reap season and a reaping season, or as I put it, a gardening and a harvesting, right? And you also have 2 kinds of workers. You have sowers and reapers, or you have gardeners and harvesters. No, Jesus is telling the disciples they're going to be harvesters here. They're going to get the easy pickings. And somebody else did the heavy lifting, maybe the woman, maybe Jesus. I don't know how to characterize that. We don't have a lot of details, but they get the easy job because the fruit is ripe. And here's the principle. When the fruit is ripe, it drops into the basket. When the fruit is ripe, it drops into the basket. You go to apple orchard in the Midwest during September, October. Where are the apples? They're all over the ground. Why? Because they fell off the tree. What happened to me September 28th, 1973, when my brother came? I already decided I want to become a Christian. I harvested myself.
You fell out of the tree.
Pardon me? I fell out of the tree, right into the basket. And so when I now take a poll with people, first I make a statement. And it really freaks them out. But this is a true statement. I have not prayed with anyone to receive Christ in over 30 years. I know what people are thinking. What a loser, Right. But they think they're losers if they don't have these notches in their belt too, just like you mentioned, Brett. So then there's more to this story. So, which I'll tell you in a moment, which you actually know, but I'll spring it on you. I take a poll of the audiences because they're not sold on this idea. I said, okay, how many here are Christians who did not become Christians through praying with someone to receive Jesus as Lord and Savior or coming down from an altar call? Raise your hand. And they raise their hand. 70%. This is my guess. This is the average.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's more like 50, sometimes more like 95. But I said, keep your hands up and look around you. How did this happen? The Holy Spirit harvested them.
Yeah.
And you see this constantly in the New Testament. And these things happened and multitudes believed. So the onus of harvesting is not on us. And because people teach that it is, and I'm not against altar calls or those little booklets with the sinner's prayer or whatever, I've used them. But because of that, people think if you don't do it that way, then you're not doing what needs to be done. And if you don't have gardening, you're not going to have a harvest. I mean, no duh, right? And so I say, do not worry about the harvest. Now, this is controversial. I have some people we know that have pushed past very aggressively. Brett's smiling because he knows of the encounter that I had with a dear brother who's been in play for a long, long time. Didn't like that idea, but he's a harvester. That's why. But when people start thinking like that, then they feel they can't play and they're going to sit on the bench because they can't do that. And I say, wait a minute, you can garden, and gardening is a little here, a little there. And the characterization that I have used that a lot of people remember is I just want them to try to put a stone in people's shoe. I just want to give them, and this is my goal, give them something worth thinking about. And if I could do that, and we got a lot of people doing their part little by little, which is the way it works. Anybody who's become a Christian, they weren't raised that way, but sometime in their adult life, they can look back and say there were all these different things that took place that God used in the gardening process that brought them to Christ. And then they ask themselves, how did I become a Christian? And it turns out, they became a Christian totally in the absence of anybody else. I was talking with Kirk Cameron. He was on a show, and Kirk's, as I'm explaining this point, Kirk says, that's the way I got saved, and it's true of most people from the show of hands. And so just to add some substance to this, though, just to, in a sense, to close the loop, I say, here's something you don't know. I asked them, I said, has anybody here heard of a guy named J. Warner Wallace? Has this come to mind, And we all know Jim, and he'd been a long friend of Stanley. He was on our team for a couple of years, cold case detective, right? The whole story about him coming from an atheist to becoming a Christian, and then a Christian apologist and a best-selling Christian author. And I think, for my money, the best apologetic speaker anyone could ever listen to. He is magnificent. I'm in awe of Jim, all right? But people don't know that J. Warner Wallace was in my garden when he was an atheist. He was listening to our show, using Stand to Reason stuff, and this was a principal influence on him in his move forward. Now, I never harvested him. Somebody went in my garden and harvested, get out of my garden. No, that wasn't my attitude, obviously, because Jesus says in John chapter 4, the one who sows and the one who reaps can rejoice together. So I don't know. Did you know Jim before he was a Christian?
No.
Oh, just afterwards, and then you worked a lot together with him before I got to know him, and then became more of a part of our team. You were working with him when you were at Stand to Reason on all kinds of projects, but he wasn't kind of front and center for me, doing great work, and it led to other fabulous things. But so you had a real, I think, discipleship influence in Jim's life. But and also Abdul Murray, some people know him, the Muslim who became a Christian. He was an attorney in Detroit and then became a Christian. Well, Abdul was in my garden too, and Brett, you and I had dinner with him together many years ago when he first told that story, and then John Noyes on our own team. He was an atheist who became a Christian. He was telling me the other day about how he was listening to me on the radio, screaming at me while he's driving in the car. The atheist, John Noyes. And now he's a Stand to Reason speaker.
And now he screams at you face to face.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, can you clarify something you said, Greg, and about, I don't know who you guys are talking about, who's come at you about the harvesting thing. So
everybody
I'll
would recognize his name. I'll just leave it at that.
I'll remain totally oblivious to it. But okay, so you mentioned he's a harvester.
Yes.
So explain that to people.
Yeah, I think that God positions some people in the lives of others to be the one that catches the fruit, that maybe they're the one who shakes the tree and the fruit drops into the basket, something like that. And there are lots of people like it. Billy Graham arguably could be a person like that. Just a lot of people. Why do all these people come to his thing? Well, a lot of them are Christians bringing other people, but they're willing to go because they're in a position where they're interested to hear a fairly straightforward and non-complex characterization of the gospel and no apologetics. He wasn't into that at all.
Yeah.
All right. But then all these people come forward. So there's a harvester, but I guarantee you those people didn't come out of nowhere.
Yes.
These aren't hardcore atheists that just happen to walk into this auditorium then, heard this message and say, OMG, I'm there. Jesus come into my life. Now, that happens occasionally, but I think it's very rare. Mm-hmm. Normally, there's a period of harvesting, gardening. And this is what we want. Mm-hmm. I don't want somebody to quickly receive Christ, characteristically, because, and this is why when my girls would go to VBS, Vacation Bible School, I didn't want any Vacation Bible School person trying to pray with them to receive Christ. I didn't know what kind of understanding they had of what they were doing. And kids will follow the instructions of adults. So what you, sometimes, maybe not your own, but other kids will follow if you're the teacher. So I didn't want a false conversion. I didn't want a decision that wasn't a conversion. Okay, I wanted my girls to be converted. Okay, so and this is hard to tell when this happens. You can have the kids going through all the motions, and a lot of times you don't know until there's durability in the midst of hardship and difficulty. And then that shows roots. When the wind starts blowing and the pressure of the world coming, are they rooted? We can do the best we can, but that's going to be the tell. That'll be the indicator. And I always give the benefit of the doubt, in my case, to my kids, but I don't know what's going to happen 3 or 4 or 5 years ago when they're out of this kind of more protective environment. So that's okay. We'll just wait it out. But some people, I don't want these false conversions, so I don't want that invitation. This sounds over spiritual maybe. I want Christ. I want the Holy Spirit to bring them to Christ. Okay? Yes. Yeah. And that happens all the time. And this was the motif in the New Testament. You know, Jesus preached, thousands believed. Peter preached, thousands believed. No altar calls. The closest thing was like maybe get baptized, but that was subsequent to salvation on my theology. So anyway, that's to answer your question. And by the way, if people want to know whether they're harvesters or gardeners, it's very easy to tell, given what I've said. If you're listening and what I've said annoys you, you're probably a harvester. But if you're going, oh man, holy smoke, I never thought, maybe there's a place for me. I could do that. If they had a game plan, and that's what we provide in the books.
Yeah, and I think
that's the gardener.
Gives the proper perspective to both harvesters and gardeners that we play a role. But maybe you're harvesting. You're holding the basket that they fall into.
That's
you're
right
for the.
We're shaking the tree or whatever.
The Holy Spirit is the one that is doing that work. I mean, the dignity that God places upon humans is that we get to work alongside Him. But hopefully a harvester knows that you're holding a basket. You're picking fruit that God has been, working on.
I think this is the perspective of all the people, including the one we're referring to, that they have about their effort. Yes, they know that the Holy Spirit's involved, but because the emphasis is there on, sometimes there's a bruising of the fruit because you're trying to pull on fruit that's not quite ready, my comment is you don't have to push the river, okay? Just let it flow. Just do what you can do. Be a faithful witness in the way that you're able to in the moment, whatever it is that comes up. Speak to that if you're able. And of course, this is what Street Smarts is all about. I got 2 chapters on atheism. I got a chapter on the problem of evil. I got a chapter on can you be good without God? By the way, all of this relates to the broader atheistic perspective, okay? And I think a lot of people, you got your hardcore materialist atheists, but you got a whole bunch of people that are practical atheists. They don't want God and Christianity. So that what they do is they grab for anything else that will give them the functional latitude that they want, the autonomy they want. That's the way I was in the 60s and 70s, okay? And so I got 4 chapters that really cover the thing. And then I have 2 chapters in the Bible and science, which people think there's a conflict there, and the problems like slavery and alleged genocide in the Bible. I have to deal with that. I have 2 chapters on abortion. I have 2 chapters on Jesus, and problems or challenges regarding that. I have a chapter on gender, sex, and marriage. And so what I'm trying to do in that book, Street Smarts, is to give a backdrop. Okay, if you're going to use questions to expose a weakness or a flaw, you got to know the flaw. Okay, and in this way, Street Smarts is just going to be a great book for Christians in general, because it's going to encourage their conviction. Oh, yeah, we're right about this. We're not wrong, and for these reasons. So there's substance there. But then once we see the flaw in somebody else's view, we have to know the questions that we can use to expose the flaw. And so what I have is a lot of model conversations for each issue. So you have to...
Sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I
Yes, you did.
Yeah,
I could see it in your eyes.
So here's what I'm thinking for the audience who's listening right now.
Sure.
I was going to say, hey, give us a quick overview of the game plan, but instead, let's do this. Let's role play this.
Sure.
Let's say I'll be the teenage kid with the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
You be the parent. Actually, you be the grandparent.
Oh my gosh.
Well, when I was at Stand to Reason, because Greg's last name Koukl is so similar to Koukl, people just would confuse us and they'd say like, "Oh, how's it working for your dad?" And I eventually came up with I thought the best response. I was like, "Well, he's not my dad. He's actually my granddad."
So rude.
I'm just thinking of a parent out there.
Yeah.
I mean, this is so important, really, to help disciple your own kids to be able to answer these challenges. And these are contemporary challenges. They're all over the culture. Your kids are going to be hit with some of these. So let's just we'll take the issue of abortion. Okay, I'm the teenage kid. I come home, Dad. I was in class today, and we got on the issue of abortion, and everyone's kind of they're pro-abortion,
Mm-hmm.
and they said, who are we to tell a woman what to do with her body?
Mm-hmm.
A woman should have a right to choose. And
Mm-hmm.
that's pretty compelling to me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now how do you engage your kid when they come?
Well, there's a lot of angles I could go on this. Like when somebody says they have a right to choose, I said, do you think you have a right to take? And they say, take what? I said, exactly. You only have a right to take certain things. You have a right to choose certain things. So what's the choice? So what I'm trying to do is get past the rhetoric right here a little bit, and you got to penetrate that. And part of what we discussed many years at Stand to Reason, worked with Scott Klusnor, for example, on this, and to try to hone this approach is the only one question kind of approach. And the way I'd play this out with somebody who approached me on this particular issue, like our son or anybody that was objecting, I'd say, let me ask you a question. Let's say you were a mom or a dad, and you had your kid come up behind you. Notice this is a question, so I'm just laying a foundation here. And your child said, "Mom or Dad, can I kill this?" What question do you have to ask them to find out the answer to before you can answer the question they just asked you?
Kill what?
What is this?
Kill, what is it? Exactly. Mm-hmm. I said, so whether it's right or wrong to kill anything depends on what it is. All right? So does abortion kill something? Yes. What does it kill? Nobody knows. I mean, this is the kind of response you get, really. Okay, well, is it alive? Well, nobody knows when life begins. Well, that wasn't what I asked you. I said, not when it begins, but is it alive? Well, I don't know. Is it growing? Yeah, well, then it's alive, right? Yeah, okay. So what is it that's growing inside mom? Is it mom, or is it something else? I mean, notice how these are all mini steps in this particular issue. And this whole dialogue, by the way, is in Street Smarts. And this is the basic issue. I'm trying to establish, first of all, that there's one question you have to answer: what is it? And once you determine what it is, then this is a huge step forward to answering the moral question of whether it's appropriate to kill whatever that is. Now, everybody knows what it is, but there's this kind of intellectual dishonesty regarding it when the woman doesn't want to have the child. All right. So I'm just stepping things through. And notice that the questions I'm asking provide very common sense responses. All right. Yeah, well, it's growing. Well, yeah, it's alive. It doesn't matter when life begins. We don't have to worry about it. If it's growing, it's alive. And that was already established by the prior question. He says, it kills something, right? Yes. Well, you only kill something that's alive. So anyway, we all have all these pieces on the table. But I'll continue with this line of questioning in just a moment, but I want you to notice something else that's going on. If I were the one who's making the case against abortion, and I am laying the pieces out, and then every time I lay the pieces out, that is meant to, as you will see, will lead to an understanding of the answer to our question, what is the unborn? If I just laid those out, it's an opportunity at every stage for the person who, in this case, the pro-choicer who disagrees with me, to take exception with my step. Oh, no, not necessarily. Well, no, we don't know what that. Who knows what? Blah, blah. Like the attempt, no one knows when life begins. But that wasn't the question I asked. And so I just gently pointed out and then asked the question again. Okay, if I put that out there, they can take exception with every step. Now we just have a fight. But because I'm using questions, and please, I don't want anybody to miss this because this changes everything. I am getting the person who is opposite me in the view to put the pieces on the table for me, because the answers are in most cases common sense answers in light of the circumstances. And when they put the pieces on the table, they are not going to take them off the table because they put them there. And so what I've done in a very conversational way is I've enlisted my opponent, in a sense, as an ally to help me show that their view is false.
Yeah, and this is so important because sometimes, we're using language like, well, expose this idea, or, and it may sound like to some, like, oh, you're just trying to one-up the person, or you're being argumentative. That's not at all what we're doing.
Or we're looking like it's a gladiator moment.
Yeah.
Who can win, who can draw first blood. And that's the way a lot of these discussions are. But Brett, this is not our project at Stand to Reason. And so this is why the tactical approach, of which Street Smarts is an extension of, with all this depth on different issues, with all the dialogues and questions, and will allow us to do that. And so the next step, now we have something in mom. Okay, well, the claim is this is mom's body. Okay, is it? Sure, it's just a piece of tissue, which is a blob of tissue. When people say that, I say, well, so are you and me. Some more blobby than others, kind of thing. The question is, what kind of tissue is it? And so I say, well, look, you've seen CSI, right? So if you go to CSI, you watch that program, and how do they know if they find a piece of tissue, whether it matches another human being? Identify, here's some hair at the crime scene. Well, they do it, and I ask them, how do they do that? DNA. Right. Well, what do they do? Well, if they get the DNA from the hair and it matches a suspect, they know that the suspect was there at that crime site. So in other words, that then becomes a match for that individual human. Right. Okay, straightforward stuff. Okay, and CSI is kind of a popular appeal. People know about this. And said, okay, if I were to take DNA from whatever that blob is that's growing inside of mom, that living thing that's growing in mom, would it match mom's DNA? Now, most people know it's not going to match because it's not mom. It's something separate than mom. Okay, so that you establish that. So this thing that's growing inside of mom, admittedly, is not mom. Okay, so this isn't mom's body. What are they going to say? Okay, so no, it's not. Okay, well, then the next question is, what is it? So if I found a piece of meat somewhere in the woods, how would I find out what kind of critter that belonged to? Well, you do another DNA test. And now you're not looking for a DNA fingerprint that identifies a particular individual human, like the first case. Now you're looking for a DNA signature. What kind of creature is this? So what's the DNA test going to show about that blob that's growing inside of mom that's not mom's body? It's not a tapeworm. It's not, some kind of foreign. I mean, those things grow inside of human bodies. It's going to be like, surprise, surprise, another individual human being. That's what's going on inside there. So notice there, and we can take this further with other objections, but I think this makes the point with the question you asked, how this process works. You have to know how the sequence goes. But once you get the sequence in your head, I mean, it's not hard to remember. Pretty straightforward because it's so common sensible. And what we end up doing is the in a certain sense the force of the line of thinking, what we already know, it leads to a conclusion about the kind of thing that mom's carrying. The pregnant mother is carrying another human being inside her uterus. No duh, right? You don't need to know anything at all, except for be a reasonably observant human being who has no understanding of biology or DNA or science at all to come to that conclusion. But now the obvious things are being denied, and so we're asking the questions to build to the obvious conclusion. What's inside mom is a growing child that she is making.
I wonder, Greg, if we can kind of end our time with you giving our listeners some tips, some encouragement on how to become a skillful questioner. Because, I mean, you have had so many conversations, and so you need Greg's book because you need the content part, you need the knowledge, of the things you're talking
No,
about.
that would be books, I think, right?
Books.
That's what you meant to say.
Well, we're promoting this book. You need all Greg's books. Like the Koukl family library, you need all of Greg's
You
books.
need the what should we call it? The quadrivium or the set of four.
We have our little Greg Koukl section on our bookshelf.
We do.
But so they need, the street smarts is so helpful in thinking about these particular issues, and it is so helpful that you show these dialogues in the book. But what is a good way for people? Because I just, from knowing you all these years and hearing you teach and starting to implement this myself,
Right.
it takes some practice. And then, like you said, you do start to see it everywhere. And you'll be watching a debate on a news show, and you start thinking of questions like, "Oh, if I was there, I would ask this question."
You see the problem,
Yeah.
and so you ask the question.
Yeah.
Right.
So do you have some tips for people? Oh, like, okay, they get the book, but now they need to practice.
Sure.
Or they need some. So how do you do it? Like, how have over the years you've gotten good?
Okay,
at this?
a couple of thoughts on this. In the tactics book, it's obviously different from the street smarts because street smarts is the third step in a lot of application. But in the tactics book, you have the game plan, but then you have all these other maneuvers with names like, Just the Facts, Mammon, Rhodes Scholar, and Taking the Roof Off, and just What a Friend We Have in Jesus, Inside Out. And these are all meant to help you have insight in conversations, so you can maneuver in conversations to actually find flaws and see the flaws and the mistakes that are being made. Okay, once you see those mistakes, now instead of pointing them out in a sense artlessly, we're just going to discipline ourselves to use a question, to think of a question to point that out, And sometimes it might start out by you saying, "Well, I'm confused about this." Now you're an atheist, right? Yeah, and so a materialist, right? This is what you told me. Yeah, so you don't think there's anything outside of the material world, right? Yeah, of course. So you're complaining about the God of the Bible that he's immoral. Of course. Look at all that stuff. I'm confused now because I don't know, where are you getting your moral standard to judge the God of the Bible with, And actually, one atheist, I had this discussion with one particular one. He's an internet atheist, and he called me on my show, and he was fairly well known. And then he wants to play the evolution card, right? And he said, well, evolution is the thing that's responsible for your morality. So what you're saying is the God of the Bible disagrees with your personal evolution, which is I just repeated his statement back to him, basically. I just connected the dots, and he said, yes. I said, okay, I rest my case. I mean, this is not a substantive complaint, obviously, when it's put that way. But notice how I was aware of the problem, so I'm just kind of like scratching my head, like Lieutenant Columbo. We call this the Columbo tactic after the famous TV detective who most young people don't know about, but ought to, because he's got this manner that's really great with his questions. So that's one thing. If you know the flaw, you're gonna want to kind of scratch your head. Wait a minute, I'm a little confused about this. How does that actually work? And then you ask the question that goes to the problem. But in the first two steps, though, remember we're asking, what do you mean by that? And how did you come to that conclusion? Those are very easy steps. And I encourage people to just commit yourself to be a student of somebody else's view for a while. Don't worry about leading them to Christ or giving them the gospel, or don't worry about, you just want to get them thinking. They've already got barriers that are in the way before the philosophers have called it the plausibility structure, get in the way of them even considering the plausibility of something like the Christian worldview, because they've got these other concerns. So you kind of have to dismantle some of those, and that's where these techniques come in. But if you're asking these questions and just asking to try to learn what their view is and why they hold their view, those are the first two steps. There's a tremendous amount of safety there. And that's the practiced arena. And you just keep doing that. And I was at the University of Minnesota, or actually just off the campus, giving a tactics conference a number of years ago. And then we sent the people, the students out, and some adults out on the campus to engage students. Okay, and this is a very different kind of thing than sitting in the classroom. It's like their eyes got really wide, and like, we didn't know you were going to have us do this. What do you think we're training for? When they got back, one woman said, when you said we were going to go out on the campus and engage students, so they used a questionnaire to do that. I think it might have been one that you put together, Brett. But they used the questionnaire. She said afterwards, when we're doing the debrief, she says, when you said that, I was more scared to do that than to have another child. To go through childbirth,
Yeah.
right? Well, that's pretty extreme. So
That's very extreme. As someone who's given birth 5 times, that's extreme.
that's right. So when we got back, though, she said she had a great time and she learned 2 things. And what she learned, and this is what people who begin just asking the first 2 questions and make no effort to change a person's view. It's just a practice. Get used to it. Get used to engaging. She said, first of all, I realized that the people were not as scary as I thought. So you know how, like in numbers, like we were like the giants and we were like grasshoppers in our own eyes, kind of thing. So we have a kind of a self-image problem there regarding. And no, she said, Dad, they weren't so scary. And I found this consistently. When you begin to engage people and talk to them, they become human beings, all right? And it makes it so much easier. And I mean, I also have a waitress come up to me and she's tatted out, right? She's got all this jewelry and things poking out of odd places of her body and all the, and I'm jingle jangle. And if there was a thunderstorm, she would be struck by lightning, is what I'm thinking. No, but because that's not my culture at all. And I'm thinking, oh man, this gal's so far from me. So I purposely start asking about her tattoos and the meaning of these tattoos and maybe some other questions, I don't say like, why do you have a bone in your nose? I don't go that far with it. But I'm just showing an interest. That's all. And what happens then is from behind all of that cultural stuff, a human being is lurking, and I'm able to get in touch with that. So that was the first thing she noticed. They're not as scary as I thought. Here's the second thing she said. They're not as smart as I thought either.
Yeah.
Now, and now it doesn't mean they're dumb, but we do sometimes have the sense that, they must have some really, really good reasons for opposing our views, when in fact, in most cases, they have not thought through them, which is why sometimes when you ask people, well, what do you mean by that? Or how did you come to that conclusion? And it vary the way you do that depending on the circumstances. I'm confused about that thing. Help me understand that. Tell me more about it, for example. You get a blank stare. I call it the Simon & Garfunkel moment, which is a 60s alert here. In 1966, they wrote this song called "The Sounds of Silence." Magnificent song, but that's what you get. You get the sounds of silence because they haven't thought through their view. Same thing with a lot of Christians too. But so this is the way to get used to it. Just be a student of others' views and don't put any pressure on yourself to persuade anybody. Just start working in the conversation, and I think people are going to find very quickly that this will be a life transforming experience for them in terms of their evangelism. And this is the phrase I've heard more than anything else regarding the tactical approach, whether it's tactics or street smarts, is this approach has changed my life and the way I engage.
And Maven has an opportunity actually for students to do this. If you want Maven to come alongside and help you in the discipleship of your kids, we do the immersive experiences, which are these opportunities where kids will get the kind of training they need. And then we put them out on the field. Yeah. We go and engage with Mormons, or we go engage with skeptics or atheists, and they get to have these conversations, and they get the practice. And in the summer of 2024, July of 2024, we have an open enrollment trip where your group doesn't have to go. Your youth group may not do something like this, but you can send your kid. And so you can go to maventruth.com and get information about that. But, well, it's a good interview when it flies by.
It did.
And, we're over an hour here.
Yeah.
And but this has just flown by. Get Greg's book, Street Smarts. Get all 4 of his books. But the resources from Greg and from Stand to Reason are going to help equip you to equip your kids. So, Greg, we really appreciate your time.
Oh, it's been so much fun being with you guys, really. We don't get to do this very often anymore because we're moving in other directions, but I'm so proud of what you're doing, Brett and Erin. It's just great to see it.
Maven exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out maventruth.com.